You know the phrase that pays. Well, hello, Kakank. Guys, I'm all agog that we are back on your video scope. How do I do this, guys? There's no script. There's no notes. Maybe you can tell there's no notes. But you stick around anyway, guys. If you see these three smiling angelic countenances, a few things must be true. One, it must be Wednesday, 8 p.m. EST, somewhere on this marble. Two, you're
Marble
about very smooth. You're also about to get blessed by three expert cartoonists, and three of that means it must be pitch me. I must be dreaming time, guys. Welcome back to Pencil to Pencil, your favorite live cast brought to you as only the pencil to pencil people can do. Guys, let's do some introductions. I'm your first host. I wear many hats besides this new orange beanie. Look, I'm setting it off. Got a little something going on. My name is JAMAR Nicholas. I'll slow it down so you can hear me. I want to enunciate tonight. JAMAR Nicholas. I am on the board of the National Cartoonist Society and also the Philadelphia chapter chair. Go Birds. On top of all those lovely things, I'm also the author, illustrator, graphic novelist, creator of Leon the Extraordinary, a very cool graphic novel series at Scholastic Graphics. I have a little thing to show you. Pause in a minute. Pause. Worst Friends Forever is the newest book out in stores now. This time next year, Leon 3 TBA to be announced will be out, and we'll do a big reveal when the time is right. Guys, I talk too much. You all know this. But I'm going to switch the spotlight over to my cohort, co-conspirator, and co-confidant. He is the reigning, defending, and undisputed world heavyweight champion of webcomics. Make the belt motion, discount, double check for Stone Cold Steve Conley. What up, Steve Conley?
Hello, friends. It is good to see you today. I also am improvising, and I'm not working from a script. My name is Steve Conley. I write and draw your 23rd favorite webcomic. Wait, 23rd? 23rd favorite webcomic. The Middle Ages you could read at Webtoons, Tapas, Go Comics, and my own website, steveconley.com.
Yes.
I also make TTRPG stuff, like for your Dungeons and the Dragons.
And the Dragons.
Like, currently, at this very moment, as we speak, in 90 minutes or so, once you're done watching this video, you should head over to Kickstarter and check out Stabracadabra. It's my latest TTRPG book. I'm also taking part in Backer Kit's Holiday Market, which is going on for the next 2 weeks. So if you go over to Backer Kit, there's a whole bunch of indie creators who have created cool stuff. It's us against Amazon, basically. And check it out at Backer Kit. But I would be remiss if I didn't introduce the Tower of Power, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, the maestro of mark making, your friend and mine, Mr. Mike Manley.
Hello, I'm making the marks, all the marks.
I'm making the marks.
I'm making all the marks. Hello, everyone. My name's Mike Manley. I probably drew your childhood.
Probably.
Yeah. I've been working in this cuckoo crazy business of comics for well over 40 years now, and it's been a pretty fun ride. Some days I do pinch myself and think like, wow, I remember being a little kid sitting on my front porch and reading comics, and then being a teenager and really wanting to draw comics, and here I am, a hunched over husk of a man having achieved his dream of becoming a hunchback.
I love it. Mike, to that, it's funny, and I don't know if people say that as much as maybe they should or used to. How often does somebody come up to you and go, wow, Mike Manley, you're living the dream? Do people say things like that to you at this point in your life?
No. Nobody comes up and says you're living the dream. No. No. Because I don't think, comics are cool, obviously.
Now they're cool.
I think as cool as comics are, and we talked about this before, as much as they are part of everyday life now and very accepted, nobody really knows cartoonists outside of, Stan Lee, Paul Schultz, and then that's about it. The average person cannot name a cartoonist. They don't really know what it is. They have a vague idea of us drawing, some kind of kooky, because it's never really been shown, right? It's not something that the average person has an idea. They think of a painter, they think of all these very Bob Ross, or this very sort of Hollywood idea of what being an artist is, right? Which is all kind of hammy, but no. An aspiring artist will be like, boy, I wish I could, have the kind of career or whatever. But no, it's funny. If I'm out painting, if I'm out plein air painting outside, people are sort of fascinated, and they'll come up and they'll want to ask you a bunch of questions, because the average person doesn't really know an artist. An average person doesn't see an artist. They see musicians. They see people playing, they go to concerts, but even when you go to a show for an artist, you don't see the artist, you know,
Mhm.
painting.
And if you do see things like that, it's kind of a spectacle, right?
Mhm.
You know, like maybe there's a live band playing and there's that dude on the edge of this stage, like speed painting or something like that.
Painting with his penis, yeah.
Yeah, you know, there's kind of like it's like a little bit of a circus act, you
Right,
know.
right. Because they
Yeah.
assume that the average person's attention span is such that they're not going to want to watch someone because you know, art is like baking, right? So what do? On the baking show, they have all this stuff and it's all edited, and then ta-da! They bring out the, you know, the finished piece, you know. So yeah, no, the average person doesn't know anything about cartooning. It's not, again, because it's not shown, you know. The average person thinks comic. If you say Marvel Comics,
They think Stan Lee.
right? They don't think John Romita, Steve Ditko, John Buscema. They don't think any of the other people that built Marvel. They think of Stan, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, so no, I don't. You know, it's when you're that 1% of people that, you know, the 1% of 1% of 1% of people that wants to be an animator or a cartoonist or whatever. It's a very small. Way more people want to be in Led Zeppelin. Way more people want to be a musician or, you know, play sports or something like that. You know, it's very immediate. You know, you have to really enjoy this process. You know, and that is a very small percentage. Even though people may enjoy art, you really have to have. We talked about before. You really have to have that kind of personality that like allows you to sort of like lock in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you'll know it when you meet as an artist. You know it when you meet another real artist. You know, someone who's like a kind of like a real zealot for it. I could always tell when I had students. The serious one is not the one who talks his big game in the beginning of class. It's the person that's quiet, sitting in the back, drawing in their sketchbook, and has a sketchbook full of stuff.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
That's the real deal.
Steve, how about you? When you're in your secret identity as a mild-mannered Steve Conley, walking down the streets, or you know, I'm
Or
sure
when you're in the coffee shop drawing, like
right.
Yeah, it's but it depends. Like certain areas in the country, like you'll see more people working on iPads and work on computers and things like that, and there can be a creative environment. I'm in an area that does not. This is not an where I am in Florida is not a creative hotspot.
Florida man doesn't come over to see what you're doing.
Well,
alligator draped around his neck and his boa constrictor.
there are some creators down here. I think Alex Savic's not too far away, but a lot of people come down here to get away from people, and so it's not that social. But occasionally there can be there is interest in that. But there is something interesting. Anyone who's making a living in a creative field, people tend to go, oh, that's awesome. That's got to be better than my job. It's not like it's not like Mike has to be bent over a table 12 hours a day.
No,
right?
Never. No.
They don't imagine that they don't connect it. They can see the product that's fun and they don't see the work necessarily. If we do it right, they don't see the work that goes into it. So yeah, there's a bit of that disconnect benefits us in some way in terms of maybe prestige, because then it looks easy. Well, why can't then anybody should be able to do it, and anybody can do it. Just it takes I think Mike has a different opinion there, but it just takes a ton of work and a ton of continuous work. So I guess they do get to see that when I'm sitting at a coffee shop, my head down. I've missed everything that's happened for the last 2 hours because I've just been, noodling on chainmail or whatever.
But most people think it's so cool. Like it's so cool.
Well, yeah, because it's not a typical job. Like, how many people have ever met a painter?
Right.
How many, more people have met doctors, lawyers, car mechanics, nurses, pharmacists. You've met all kinds of people all the time, but an artist it's still a very rare thing. And then
they're sleeping on your back porch.
Yeah. So, it's like now because, you can see an artist on YouTube, everything is always sped up again. So it doesn't give you the real idea of what the process.
How about you, Jamar?
Well, you know what? It's interesting, kind of bouncing off of doing school visits. I just had a little run of school visits last week, and just was it yesterday? Yeah, yesterday I just did school visits, and I think even with kids that young, it's kind of hard to fathom that you did something that you just didn't sit down and just dream up at that moment. Like I think at that stage of development, there's really no planning. You just do something until you're tired of doing it. Or they tell you to put your pencil down, we're doing this now. You know what I'm saying? So like a lot of times when I'm kind of doing workshops or talking to families about doing this stuff for real, FR, as the kids say, is that, a big part of this, especially when you're young, is getting past the fun part. Because right now it's fun. And then when you're bored or it's not fun, you stop. And that's not, on the other side of that is where the profession comes from.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And that's kind of like, that's a lot.
And there's that moment at which drawing also becomes frustrating because you want to draw something and you can't. When you're real little, you're just expressing yourself.
Right.
And you get a lot of praise for that. And you're just expressing yourself. And there's no like outside or even personal critique of the work. But I remember my friend's daughter, Selena, used to love to draw. And then there was about a point at which it was frustrating.
Right.
Because then Uncle Mike has to draw the horse. Right. And then I can't draw the horse like Uncle Mike. So that's even more frustrating. Right. So you either go over that hump and you continue to go because you enjoy it. Right. Or I'm kind of done with this now,
Right.
That's why everybody used to get art classes. And then there was like I said, in high school, I had the general art class, which was the bullshit class everybody could take. Making art. And then
I'm making a clay snake.
Right. Yeah. Right. And then there was the vocational art, which was like learning a trade, right? Which is different from saying, we're going to make something out of paper mache.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I just, while you're talking, Mike, I was just thinking about in clay, when you're making ashtrays or making clay snakes or cigarettes in your class. Right. It's just nobody really takes it seriously and just waiting. Or, especially when I was in grade school, art class was people stealing paper or cutting from another class because, that's where you hide in the art room.
Yeah, I mean, I always think that visual arts get short shrift compared to music. Music is always thought of as being more serious, right. And art is always seems to be like thought of as being more bullshit, and I think people look at the fact that even though not everybody who obviously plays an instrument becomes a musician, it seems like it's a more logical path. Like if you got really good at playing a horn, you could get a gig. And if you got a gig, those gigs could continue and, then you're Led Zeppelin, or you're Chuck Mangione or something, right?
Oh,
I think with art, most people don't know someone who was an artist, don't know somebody who was a successful artist. And so it seems much more abstract, It seems like the least practical of all things. You know what I mean? We've all done those things where you go do the job day or the school fair thing or whatever, and the parent comes up and they're like, "Oh my God, you know, Timmy wants to be an artist or Cindy wants to be an artist. What do I do? Are they gonna be able to make it? You know?" And you're like, "Yeah, look at me. I'm fat.
Can I break steaks? Can I break her wrist so she won't want to draw anymore?"
Yeah. And I don't know. And occasionally you have a parent who understands it, even though they don't understand how to do it or they don't understand the path. Because again, we sort of have an idea of how to be a musician. You play good enough and somebody goes, "Hey, you're good." Right? But if you're an artist and you're good, it's not so. I guess you go to a gallery, or you know, it's still not something I think that is very well, at least in America. Maybe it's different in Europe, maybe it's different in Japan, but that's been my experience as a teacher. Is most of the students who want to do this don't, even if they have a supportive parent, they don't really understand any of the paths to get to where you might want to be.
Right. Well, none of it makes sense if you really think about it. And even George Gant in the chat was kind of like, there's so many different ways to do this, and it's kind of, you get back what you put in to a degree, but also like I made a joke a second ago. It's like, but also all the artists that people know are like that guy, that cousin in your family that can't keep a job.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or it's like, oh, Francis is on the back step again asking for money. You know what I mean? So
you say that, but I suppose I don't know. I mean,
you don't believe that.
I thought of it as being a job, because when I would watch things like The Wonderful World of Disney and they had people who did this, I knew that there were cartoonists and that this was a job. Right. And if you were good enough, the thing is, like, where do you go to get the job? So, you knew in animation, you've got to go to a studio, right? And you knew in the case of comics, well, I guess I got to show my work to somebody who works at Marvel Comics, right? With the Syndicate, that's still not something I think is as well known, because a lot of people want to do comic strips, but I mean, now it's not as foggy as it was in the 70s and 80s. I mean, there's a whole how-to, a million videos and books and everything. But I still think in the end, you have to have that personality that goes beyond you enjoy the frustration. You don't like drawing bad, and you're frustrated, but you really still enjoy drawing. You won't give it up. Like, there's people who give up music because they enjoy it and they kind of pick around with it, and that satisfies that itch, even though they're never gonna be a professional, and they'll probably never ever really get good at playing. They'll sort of stay at that level. I mean, it's kind of that way with art if you think about it. Most people, you pull people off of the street. If you could have had a drawing they did at 7 or 8 years old, and most people sat down now and drew, they would draw kind of like they did when they were 7 or 8 years old.
It'll look exactly the same, right?
Right. Yeah, because they just, But if you put the time in and you study, your level starts going up.
I remember I was drawing I was at Baltimore Comic-Con like 2-3 years ago when I was drawing alongside a kid. He drew part of the picture, I drew the other part of the picture, and he saw my side and he went, "Oh man," like he felt like, my side. And I put under it Steve, and I calculated my age in months. This number of months is my age. And I felt like that gives him some context as to why this one might be a little bit better than his. And like the idea that just encouraging kids that it is achievable and helping them get, I love that you mentioned that, Mike. There's kind of that point where, you know, at some point your appreciation for art exceeds your ability. Like there's a time when they're kind of in sync, or they're kind of just catching up, and you can do anything. And then at some point, I can't draw a horse. That point, like, oh, and then I'm at the point, and at some point you get past that, like the point, like, yeah, I can't, but I can draw my horse, and my horse is, it's going to be, it's anatomically, you wouldn't want to build life from it, but you would be a horror, but it's going to be funny. It's going to be fun to look at. There's some, I don't know, there's something about like a certain amount of chutzpah that you just need to get past that doubt or realization that you're not.
Well, you know, it's a funny thing, because a little kid will draw something and it's a horse or a dog, and it's, you know, it's really bizarre and weird and abstract, but that feeling they got from doing it is what satisfies them, right? They're expressing themselves. Right? It's when you become critical, and then other people become critical.
Well, speaking of work that was done by kids, Donato, who was on the channel a while ago, a little bit of inspiration. If you check out this episode with Donato, he's fantastic. There's a book that came out, Dungeons & Dragons, tied to the Stranger Things. It's Dungeons & Dragons Tales from the Table, a campaign archive. And it includes artwork that Donato did when he was a kid playing Dungeons & Dragons. So the fantasy art that he's done, which is so gorgeous. And this book is just, the publishers reached out to him, and they've included his artwork in here. Like an artwork from other, I think some associates of his as well. And all this stuff just, you know, turned into the amazing artist we see now. I'm glad he kept it all. What a wonderful place to, I think he included a few pieces that he's done more recently.
Show off.
But it's so gorgeous, and it's a pretty awesome book.
Where'd you get that, Stone Cold?
I think it's available at any bookstore. I think it's also available from
all books are sold if they sell books.
Yeah, it is. It's a Random House Worlds publisher, and it's tied to Stranger Things.
Can I do some show and tell?
Please,
and we'll get started. So I just got a nice little box from Scholastic, and there's some Leon swag I'd like to share with you.
Ooh!
Oh, not you, Manly.
Happy swag.
So check that out.
What is that?
This is a tote bag.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
With this, sorry, I'm doing a horrible job of this. Here you go. With the Scholastic Graphics 20 years logo on it, and look, your boy's right in the middle, next to Dog Man, and and Babysitter's Club and Bone. How cool is that? So yeah, that's talk about, you know, living dreams, you guys. How cool is that? And Mimi's in the chat going, Unico.
Unico.
Thanks, Mimi. Nobody says Leon. Thanks, Mimi.
That's amazing.
But, yeah, and you know, I got some other stuff, but yeah, you know, speaking about getting from one place to the next, how cool is that, huh?
Fantastic.
Too late. You tried, Mimi. I'll give you that. Appreciate that. So, all right, guys, let's get this started. Thanks for hanging out with us, and you know, I'm glad that we can come together and talk about the love of the craft, the love of cartoon, the love of doing this as your full-time hustle. Like, that's real. And we have dedicated November to this really cool series, Drawing Better Backgrounds with Professor Mike Manley. Last week we talked about, I guess, like spatial awareness and shot selection and things of that nature. Mike, what are we doing tonight? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm ADHD. I'm sorry. Before we get started, some of you guys are having problems with with your orientation, and I'll try to keep it even right there. StreamYard has now created 2 streams that are happening at the same time. So if you're watching on the YouTube channel and like it's not looking right on your screen, like it might be in a phone mode or vice versa, click out of this and go back to the YouTube channel. There'll be another stream. So you have to pick the right stream for the right orientation of how you're watching. I'm sorry, Mike, continue.
Okay. Well, I guess this is part 3 of our background lessons, I guess. And, you know, this could really go on for quite a while because it's a pretty deep subject, drawing environments. I mean, you have some people that's just what they do at the studios. They just draw, design, and paint backgrounds and environments, you know. And one of the things that always got me when I was younger, especially, is that there were some people who you could tell they really loved drawing the backgrounds, and their backgrounds were beautiful and really interesting. And then there's other people that kind of like, you know, they were much more interested in figures. And the backgrounds are sort of stuck in. But I think the people that are real world builders, the cartoonists that other cartoonists look to, and the cartoonists I think that people really remember as far as building environments are the great people like, you know, Kirby. Everybody, when you think of a Marvel comic, his language for shapes and building all those kooky cosmic effects. I mean, until he did that, nobody drew anything like that. Nobody drew that sense of energy and power and scope, you know. And then you had somebody like Mobius, right, who transitioned from comics and doing, you know, westerns in a sort of a very Kniff style, and then he branched out into doing his Mobius style, which really, I mean, just blew everybody's mind. And then he ended up going and working in film, right? So there are people like that who really enjoyed, but the backgrounds were just as important as the characters, you know? And so I always thought of it as there's sort of two kinds of backgrounds in comics, really. There's realistic backgrounds and then cartoony or design backgrounds. And in comics, if you go back almost 100 years now, you had people that started doing realism, which is still an abstraction and design of reality. So you had Hal Foster, and then you had Milton Caniff and Noel Sickles, who started doing realistic drawing. At the same time, you had, you know, Katzenjammer Kids and Popeye and much more what they call Bigfoot stuff, right? And then you had animation, which was much more cartoony. But then Disney started investing time and a lot of money to start making his cartoons have a much more of a sense of reality. That everybody didn't have the rubber hose. So when they started with Snow White, from then on, the amount of study of nature and the way things and people and trees and water, and I mean, you even had an effects department that just did water and smoke and lava and rain and wind. So I always, as a kid, thought there were sort of like two schools: the cartoony school and then the sort of realistic school. And I liked both. Like I said, you know, as a very young kid, I was very impressed, struck by those cartoons by Chuck Jones that were laid out by Maurice Noble. They just riveted me as a kid. And I wasn't even really conscious of the fact, like, oh, this is who this person was, but I knew that those cartoons were better than the other cartoons. And those cartoons, the backgrounds, everything looked way cooler. So because I like to do both kinds of cartooning, I like to do realism and I like to do cartoony stuff, I sort of had to try to hack the process of how you design, because it's all design, right? If you look at a real tree, how do you take that real tree and boil it down into a interesting cartoon tree? And you start noticing as a kid and as a young artist, you start noticing, oh, I really like how this person does water, how this person does trees, how this person does bricks, how this person does, metallic stuff. So I always had people that I looked at specifically for certain things because they were really good at doing that kind of stuff. So I was going to call this, if you bring up the window, I think the screen, I was going to call this no broccoli trees. This is what I call this this lecture, because one of the things I always felt was a real cheat was people would do that kind of bubble leaves, they would call them, like bubble leaves, and they would draw a tree. It would just look like a stalk of broccoli, right? Or any other tree would be sort of like a pine tree, like a Christmas tree, like a flat, right?
Steve is so abused.
So I'd always say no broccoli trees. I'll get back, go to the next.
I like that broccoli tree. I see what you're saying, Mike. As a background go, it's not very convincing. It's not going to help set the stage. Because you can have cartoony trees, but it'll be like, again, like Maurice Noble or Walt Kelly. Very cartoony, but also has a reality to it. It feels of his world.
Right. Let's see here. I'm trying to get all my ducks in a row here.
No broccoli ducks.
Let's see here. So. Okay. Okay, you can share the screen now. So a couple of years ago, when I was working with Liang and Mimi, they were both working on animation portfolios to do, try to get work in the animation business doing backgrounds. And one of the things that I ended up doing was, in between seasons, when I started storyboarding, when they didn't have any storyboards, I switched over to doing background designs on Superman and Batman and Batman Beyond, because coming from comics where you really have to draw, everything, you got to draw all the rooms and the buildings and the environments, that was a skill set that I had. So it allowed me to stay employed, because usually what would happen on a show is the first people that are finished are the storyboard artists. And then usually there are people, you get some designs when you start boarding. But then after the board is done, there are backgrounds done based upon the storyboard panels. So one of the things you have to do is you have to be good at drawing all kinds of different environments, because you never know what's going to, it might be Mars, or it might be a scientific laboratory, or it might be a rocky landscape or whatever. So one of the things about doing backgrounds is that it's really based upon nature. It's based upon real trees, real rocks, real rivers. And so the best way to learn how to make your backgrounds better is to actually look at nature and to study nature for the variety of shapes. And there's a great guy you can learn a lot from with
JAMAR
this,
Nicholas. Okay.
named Will Weston. He's on Instagram.
How do you spell his name, Mike?
Weston, Weston. And he used to teach at Art Center.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a great Instagram with all this kind of stuff I'm talking about. And he would have a landscape class where he would take people out. He would draw the landscape. They would study different things. They would study trees. And, when you draw a palm tree, there are different kind of palm trees. When you're drawing, rocks or cactuses or things like that, an infinite variety of shapes, and how you play with those shapes and make those shapes interesting, is the difference between Fred Flintstone's house and a great Roadrunner background, or something much more film noir like the Batman stuff. So taking the time, getting yourself a sketchbook, and looking at what guys like Weston are teaching, puts the stuff up for free. And one of the things I will say, that even though I was always pretty good at drawing backgrounds, my backgrounds really jumped when I started going out and plein air painting. I really started studying nature firsthand. And one of the things about when you go out and you draw real trees, you start noticing the rhythms and the shapes of things. Because usually what happens with comics is people, we all do it. We all start as sort of a Dr. Frankenstein. So we all have the artists that we like. And so what we start doing, we start building our style out of the style of other people. And if you're drawing a tree, but you don't really study what a real tree looks like, and what you're doing is you're making your tree based upon the tree, the thoughts of what another person thinks a tree looks like, then you're never really coming up with your own reaction, an expression of what a tree looks like. You're always sort of cobbling together what somebody else did. And so you're not going to really have your own thoughts about that, right? So it's sort of a combination of things, of looking at nature, and you can study other people, and you can study how other people break things down. If you look at Mondrian, who ended up doing these very geometric designs, if you Google him tonight, you will see that he started out being a naturalistic painter. And he would paint trees and he would paint landscapes. And then he started designing that, and they started becoming abstract. And then he eventually became, very linear, super linear. But that thought process started by looking at nature and looking at the intervals and the shapes, the negative and the positive shapes created by a tree, the branches on a tree. So that's a thought process. It's a design process. And what we're talking about tonight is the design process. You should start with nature, or reintroduce yourself to nature. And you can study people like Maurice Noble. There's a great book out on him. Again, there's people like Will Weston. There's plenty of books on landscape painting and landscape drawing. Google is full of diagrams of trees, you know, what an apple tree looks like, what a palm tree looks like. You build yourself a little reference file of that kind of stuff. But this illustration here, so here's a real environment. And then this is a designed, mine going over that as an example to show how to take a real environment as a base and turn that into a designed environment, right? I was working over her drawing. And one of the things about when you do a more cartoon or push design is that the shape language becomes very important. The simpler you become, the more important the shapes become. And things like asymmetry become very important. So if you look at the shapes of these trees, I'm trying to come up with ideas to make each one of those shapes a little bit different. So I'm not repeating the same shapes. If you repeat the same shapes, it kind of kills the interest. Symmetry kills interest. So I kind of pushed the perspective, even though this is a kind of a cool photo because it's kind of warpy. I pushed it even more. I took that roof and I made it more interesting. And so one of the things you do when you're drawing is you try to find interesting shapes. Interesting shapes. And you don't want to repeat the shapes. So this tree is a different shape than this tree. This tree is a different shape than this. These little shapes all become extremely important. These shapes, the intervals, the negative space on the branches of a tree become very important. You can make something really cool by playing around with those shapes. So those are what I call informed shapes and not lazy shapes. What we don't want ever are lazy shapes. Every shape is important. Just like these mountains, right? These mountains all have interesting shapes. This shape is different than that shape. This shape is different than that shape. This shape is different than that shape. These intervals all become very interesting, and it keeps it from being boring. This rock is very asymmetrical, very uneven. So something like that is sort of like even these clouds, right? Different shapes. And then because this is a linear drawing and there is no perspective, there's only designed or implied perspective. By making this cloud bigger than this cloud, we indicate depth. We indicate perspective because there's actually no real perspective. It's designed perspective. So you have real perspective, which we'll see later here. And then you have what this is design perspective. So I know a lot of people like to do cartoony stuff, and maybe they're not really into, let's say, realism. But the same basic rules will apply, as you'll see later as we go on, when you're drawing something more realistic. Because again, you're always boiling everything down. No matter how realistic you draw something, it's not real. It's still an abstraction. you're still making a conscious decision to do this and not do that, or to take this out or to move this. One of the things I learned as a landscape painter, in order to make my paintings better, especially when you're doing a plein air painting, which is you're going to go out and you're only going to have, a couple hours at the most to paint any subject before the light changes too much. Maybe a little bit longer on a cloudy day. You have to start making choices right away. You have to start deciding, like, oh, what am I going to paint? How much of that going to paint? How am I going to interpret that? You're also aware of things like where's the sun? So if you go out and you start painting at noon or solar noon, when the sun is the highest point in the sky, and then 40 minutes later, the shadows are going to start to shift. 2 hours later, the shadows will really shift. So you have to sort of plan. That's one of the things I learned by doing that, is I had to plan. When I first went out, you're rushing, just trying to get everything down. But so you have to sort of plan. It's the same thing when you're doing a background. You have to plan this out. What are you trying to say? What's the purpose of this? What's the story purpose? To me, if this is realism, okay, we accept it because it's real. If it's a cartoon, it's not real. So we can make a lot of choices here that, all you can do in the first one is go, oh, I want to film this at sunset. I want my camera to be higher. I want my camera to be lower. I want the sun to be overhead, or I want it to be raining. But you're stuck with whatever actually is there. When you start designing things, well, you're God. You can move the clouds around. Look at the clouds here. Little weird splotchy clouds. These clouds are much more interesting because you can decide to make them more interesting. Here's another one. This one, actually, I think I was going over something that Mimi had done and talking about how to make these shapes more interesting. And trees are great because there's an endless variety of old trees, right? And the best thing to do is to have a sketchbook and just sit there and draw a couple trees. You can have, I always try to advise people to have like a sketchbook for specific things. I think that's really good. And I wish I had done it earlier because my sketchbooks were kind of a mess because there'd be a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But again, if this is an animation or a cartoon background, we're indicating perspective because there's no real perspective. It's not accurate perspective. This is designed perspective. So we know if we do these shapes here, we layer or pile things on top of each other to create the illusion of perspective. Even things like that. The fence, and you can make something interesting, like add a little bit of a character, like, well, maybe all these posts are not even. Maybe one's broken. Maybe one's laying in the grass. So I say you start out with the basic, simplest shape that you can. Again, these triangle, I talked about last week, these triangular shapes add a dynamic. So these are sort of mushed triangle, but that triangle is pointing right at the house. This triangle, this is a triangle, is leading you right to the house. And then these shapes in here, these intervals in here, can really go and make this interesting. Again, symmetry would make it boring. And you can learn a lot about design from nature because nature is always the best designer. So that's what this is about. Looking at things, finding interesting rhythms, interesting shapes, trying not to repeat the shape, trying to take the shape and make the shape more interesting.
Awesome.
Let me get my next.
I got a question here from Jared on YouTube. Do you have quote comfort background elements, like a specific style of tree or what have you, that you've done loads of times with minor variations, or do you always try to do a tree you've never done before?
It's all job specific, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like if I'm drawing the Phantom, I'm going to show a little bunch of Phantom stuff. When I'm drawing the Phantom, I'm always trying to draw. I look at real jungles, right? One of the things that I decided when I took on the Phantom is I wanted to draw, even though it's a fantasy world, I wanted to look at real jungles rather than make up stuff. Because I think what happens when you just make up stuff, it ends up becoming rote and it ends up becoming boring, right?
Right.
It's like a great thing. I've done it before. Sit down and draw 50 heads. I would take a little sheet of paper and I would just draw 50 heads. And what you find out is how much do you got up here? If you start drawing like the same ear and the same kind of nose and the same kind of eyebrow and the same kind of eyelid and the same kind of nostril and the same kind of mouth, if you cannot draw 50 different heads, you got a lot, you don't have a lot up here. You got a lot of work to do to put that up here, right? So it's the same way with nature, you know? When you look at the great background designers like Earl, the guy who did those backgrounds for Sleeping Beauty.
Ivan Earl?
Ivan Earl. Beautiful. Yeah. Amazing design. Amazing design. But that was all based upon him understanding nature and then boiling it down. Boiling it down. So to me, it's like you educate yourself on these principles, these ideas. Then that gives you a wide ability to stretch stylistically.
Right.
That's why I think I can do different styles, because my core is solid, which gives me then the flexibility to explore these other styles. Once you understand the principle, the core principles of animation, straights against the curves, things like that, rhythm, asymmetry, all these basic design principles. Once you learn those, well, then when you're doing something, you go, what's wrong with this? Why is this character or this tree or this character I'm designing, this monster, what's wrong? Why is this boring to me?
Right.
And then you try to, again, I have my little checklist. Is it even? Is it symmetrical? Could something be bigger? Could something be smaller? And one of the things I think really propels people forward is if you're completely willing to trash a drawing that you spent time on.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you're completely willing to trash it, that doesn't mean that drawing does not have value because it got you to where you are now.
Right.
But if you can go, you know what? This sucks. I'm not going to settle for this.
Right.
And I'm not going to let the fact that I spent 3 days on this convince me that I just can't give that up. I can't. It's not great, but I spent 3 days on it, so I'm gonna stay married to this bad drawing or bad design. When you can, you don't have to ball it up and throw it in the trash, but when you can say, no, I'm discarding this. When you can do that, that's when you really start learning. Because you have to be the one to decide to do that. Because when you're in school or you're taking a class, you have the benefit of the teacher who has that experience, who's gone through that process, can look at your drawing. Most of the time when I would critique students' work, I would be critiquing this. The critique usually would consist of the same handful of things that we're talking about. Shape, drawing through something. Can you really feel the form? Are you using the center line? All these real basic things that we talked about over the course of this podcast. So I'm going to show something here.
And drawing through an object is basically drawing all the objects in the scene as if they were transparent. So like you could see things through it, so you don't cheat. Basically, like if someone's drawing something behind a tree, draw the thing behind the tree. So it
yes,
yeah.
So here's a Felix. So this is a very early style of cartooning. And everybody's very round, sort of very round and, very pleasing, and the backgrounds fit the design aesthetic of Felix. And, you always go right to Felix because he's black, right? But no, look at these palm trees, how interesting those shapes are. They're not all the same. They're not cookie cutter. And again, you're doing a very simple style, so the backgrounds can't look like Prince Valiant, right? And so, even though these are not real palm trees, you get the feeling of a real palm tree. And
there is real understanding of palm trees, though. That one in the, I don't know, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
The 13th panel.
Yeah, that one you just moused over right there, where he's behind the tree. That kind of the sense of the way they grow, almost like a pine cone. It's beautiful, beautiful.
Right. So here's a artist who may have lived in California. He certainly understood palm trees, and that. But then look how he made these interesting shapes and textures.
Glorious.
Nice, and it frames. And again, this is a simple style, so you don't want to do something that's going to overpower the style. So there's no lazy shapes.
Was this a Sunday, Mike? That would get color?
Yeah, this is a Sunday. Get color. There's no lazy shapes. Even like this little pot.
Mm-hmm.
All these shapes. Look at the interesting negative, right? Very interesting shapes. And this is a pretty loose style, even that camera, everything is interesting. Nothing is even. This is all hand drawn, and you feel the hand of the artist. It's not like perfect. It's kind of, and that energy is carried through everything, So let me stop that and
That's great.
I'll bring up my next
question while you're loading that up. Jim on the YouTube asks, kind of for the group, do you ever draw to practice or just project related? So that must be a time management question as much as a art question.
Yeah, I don't. When I was teaching, I drew more instructive. Generally, what I do when I'm drawing is I would do my wind down or warm up or wind down at the end, and that's just for me, sort of like, I don't know, like loosening up. After, one thing about doing comic strips, it's a very focused, very specific kind of job. you've got to put the lettering in, you got to put this here, the person has to be doing this, you have to show this, you have to show, there's a lot, it's, it's like making a movie, and I have to make everything.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be all the actors, and I have to be the director and the cameraman and the makeup artist and the scenic designer and
The location person, the prop master.
Exactly, right. So one of the things I like to do is just sort of like wind down or warm up and just sort of let my imagination run without any restraint. But if I suppose if I had more time on a specific project, I might do a drawing to study something. Usually, and I think this happens with a lot of professionals, is the luxury of time you had when you were younger, where you could say, like, I'm just going to practice drawing hands today.
Right.
Or I just want to draw a guy in the suit with his arms raised. Or I want to draw a horse. Or I want to practice drawing cats or whatever. I don't really have the luxury that I had when I was younger to say, well, I'm just going to, like, I'm better at drawing horses. I'm not as good at drawing horses as I want to be. I would have to literally go, like, take a month or two and just draw horses.
Has there been a project you've worked on, Mike, that you said, I really want to draw giant robots, and you talk to the writer and say, hey, can you work some giant robots into the next story? Or have you ever found that they're catering the story to your interests or skills?
The last Phantom story, the one before this one, where he was fighting a guy who was sort of like Elon Mollusk. I told Tony I wanted the Phantom to fight a robot.
Excellent.
So we came up with a story where he basically is fighting a robot.
That's awesome.
But no, I mean, the thing with, at least with me, and being a comic strip artist is very different than being a comic book artist, because there was always a break. With a comic strip, there's never a break. Never a break. It's a treadmill. You're always on the treadmill. And if you skip a day or two, it's always hell to pay. It's always, if you get sick for 3 or 4 days, or you just sort of have a couple days, it was a couple days last week where I just like, I probably still work 10 hours a day, but there were a couple days where you just kind of, you're not, you're not punching it over the fence, but let me see here. So let me share. Where's the window now?
How do you handle backgrounds, Jamar? How does Leon handle the backgrounds?
Ooh, Nelly.
So here is a background that I just did today. So
that's great.
You can sort of see my rough. And what I did here, the layer that I initially had, I guess I got deleted. But sometimes what I'll do is, when I'm drawing something more realistic, what helps lend a sense of realism is the shadows and the cast shadow, which is the shadow, like this guy's leg is casting a shadow on the Phantom, right? And then you're also dealing with the 3 levels: foreground, middle ground, background. You're always dealing with that. And so I have the foreground figures, and then I have the background, and then there'll be lettering above him. So the first thing I do always is I have to put the lettering in so I know how much room I have to work with. And then, because I'm working in clip, but if I was working in traditional media, I would take a non-photo or a very hard lead, like a 3H, and I would kind of using the side of my pencil, or I use like a fuzzy pencil. I think it's a colored pencil. Line it up, and you can kind of see here a little bit. I would kind of roughly block this in with just these shapes, and I'm sort of thinking of the shadow, because what you see when you're looking at nature is you're seeing light and shadow, and you're really seeing when you're drawing trees and nature is you're seeing the shadow cast by the sun. So I would rough that in, and I'm thinking again of framing. So I wanted to frame the Phantom, and he's carrying this guy he just knocked out, and he and Devil are going to carry him to the jail. And then I'm thinking of these, again now, having done a lot of study of jungles in the last 9 years, I have a repertoire of shapes that I've studied from looking at real jungles. And so I roughly block that in, and then here's the final.
Oh.
Now, I didn't even finish inking all that because I knew I was going to, the board balloon was going to be up there. And then I'm thinking about not only the shadow and the cast shadow, but I'm thinking of these leaves are different than the little leaves in the back. So it's a difference in marks, scale of mark making, and the kind of mark that I'm making. And so I try to make these with a bigger pen, and then I make these sort of like little dots and dashes with a smaller pen, just to give me a variety of shapes. And one of the people I really learned a lot from, if you can find a copy of this story by Frazetta, Untamed Love, there is so much to learn. Everybody from Dave Stevens, all the modern guys, Wrightson, Kaluta, all those guys, Kevin Nowlin, all those guys really learned a lot from this story of how to ink grass and trees. And Frazetta got this technique where you can see these beautiful rhythm lines, and then just these little, goes in, puts those little drop shadows in there, all the drop shadows. These lines are not all connected, and so it gives it a sort of a spark, but it gives it an energy. This whole thing has energy. It's a great figure, the great line, that great inking on the line. He was one of the best inkers ever. Everything is here, is flowing. So again, that's one of the things. I have a copy of this book. That's one of the things a little lesson kind of stuck in my head, rhythm, and those little drop shadows. Here's another great artist you can learn from. Now, Roy Crane, his work is sort of in between realism and cartoony, because he draws kind of cartoony, but he lights it realistically. And he's one of the best guys. You know, Al Williamson said whenever he was stuck for an idea, he'd look at either Wally Wood, Roy Crane, or Frank Robbins. And he loved Roy Crane. He had a whole set of the entire run of Captain Easy and Buzz Sawyer, as he did of Foster and Raymond. And he really, but that, again, Beautiful shape design. None of these little stalactites and stalagmites are the same shape.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful variety. And then he worked on that old tone board, which we talked about before, which was a sheet of illustration board that had these lines,
Mm-hmm.
and they gave you usually, well, I think this is not the duotone. Well, maybe it is. Yeah, it is the
Yeah, it looks like dual shade. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was also a great guy who was great at doing water. Because that could be a whole other separate thing on just water.
Mm-hmm.
Please.
Right.
That'd be great.
Great jungle.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
I'm looking at this stuff and I'm stealing it.
Love that third panel.
Right. Then he painted that in on the duotone.
Hmm.
Which you can now basically do in Clip Studio because you have the duotone.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you could actually, so I have done that because I'm working in Clip Studio. I've done that. But again, beautiful design, framing the character, you know, these leaves are different. You know, he makes interesting leaf texture and mark making. Cast shadow, which gives the character weight. It also gives the tree weight, which is different in a way than because he's trying to make like a real tree, even though it's slightly cartoony. There's a lot of comparison, I think, between him and Hergé and a lot of the Line Claire guys in France. Again, beautiful shapes. Those little drop shadows. So what you're seeing really is what holds this is the shadow shape of the tree. The shadow, the cast shadow. It gives it a weight. But what's also really good is studying how he uses white space. He doesn't overpower it. He lets it breathe. Which again is, I think, why he also did the stuff using the duotone. I mean, just look at that beautiful shapes there. That beautiful shape of that water. Stuff on the surface of the water. And black on black on black on black on black. Just a little bit of a rim light. But you feel that this is in front of that. Even though this is all black. And there's hardly any rendering or turning of form. It's mostly just black and white with that duotone. And just look at that beautiful shape. That's a designed shape. There are no lazy shapes on this entire thing. Nothing. No accidents. No accident.
It's gorgeous.
So once you start looking at, again, beautiful. Look how much black he puts on that. And just a little bit of mix of the white to hold it.
Mm-hmm.
But all these little cracks of white are considered. That's what makes it feel correct. And then look at here. This is all black. I think it's probably a little bit of there's probably a half tone in there. But
yeah. That's so great. And just the control of the tone there also kind of sets the time of day in the strip, which is so masterful. And the shadows and the figures,
yeah. You know, and again, there's a cartooniness to it, right? But look at there's just a beautiful shape of that smoke. Beautiful shape. Everything is considered. Nothing is awkward or weird. Even again, putting all that black on top of each other, you can't do that if your design is bad. It won't work. You know, doing that in there, that all those shapes are beautiful.
Yeah, Mike, we need to do a water episode.
So here's another one of my Phantom.
That's great.
Right? And so I'm thinking of the shapes. I love drawing rocks because rocks are fun. You can make all kinds of really cool textures and different shapes, but I don't want all these shapes to be the same, all these negative shapes. And the positive shapes have to be as interesting as the negative shapes. And those trees, the rhythm of the trees, those intervals. And I'm always conscious of the fact, too, that my strip is reduced. And I have no idea, but the overriding rule is that reproduction is not my friend. I have no control over anything once it leaves my studio. Whether the paper prints it big, paper prints it small, paper prints it upside down, I have no control over the coloring. The only strip that I have any control over the coloring is a Judge Parker Sunday. I have no control over the daily coloring. So it has to work here. So even if the colorist is not top tier or is rushed or somebody else filled in for him, it has to work here. So again, one of the things I picked up from Frazetta, those little drop shadows and a little bit of texture.
Mike, I have a question. For a strip like this that's so open, I'm sure you're, as we say in the business, inking for color, right? So, this is going to get colored, right? So, can you kind of explain I guess this is more of a design question. It's like, how do you figure out where you're not going to spot blacks? Because it's going to get muddy if it's colored over.
Well, my idea on here was black in the foreground, everything is converging towards the Phantom, low angle gives it this sense of speed, right? Everything is kind of warpy, and then the the faraway background is flat. So this, because it's flat, all of these dynamic shapes, along with the dynamic shape of the horse and devil running, all these things are pointing at the Phantom and giving us the sense. It's sort of like if I were to draw a diagram on top of this, everything is either an explosion coming from his hoof forward, or so these blacks here frame him, right? That's my thinking. And a lot of times, when this happens, it's a feeling because it's very internal now. Sometimes it's conscious, but it's like you have this I have a feeling when I'm drawing, yes, this is looking good. This is looking cool. Or if not, then I can, again, break it out and apply what am I doing? Oh, yeah, this shape is wrong. This shape sucks. This shape is doughy or lazy or lumpy, So here's a Phantom. The pencils. And penciling in the drop shadows. And then I'll see here I can find the inked version of that. I don't know if I was able to find that. essentially, this is what I was going to do. This is my inking, sort of breaking it up to add the texture. And then I put the zip on so it looks like there's a shadow falling over it.
Yeah, that's dope.
Right. And then what are these?
I like vines. Yeah.
Everything is leading right to the Phantom. Framing these people and then leading right to the Phantom and Devil. These tree shapes, it's almost like I'm just drawing an arrow, right? So when I lay this out, the first thing I do is I draw the big shapes that I want these things to lead them right to the characters. Then a variety of leaf shapes, again, because I've looked at jungles, and I noticed, you know, when you just make up your jungles and your trees from looking at other people's comic books, you're like really not understanding how a tree works, right? You're just sort of kind of understanding maybe how another guy drew leaf shapes,
Right.
And kind of how maybe that person drew a tree trunk. But when you go and you look at an African jungle, it's different than if you're drawing the woods of North Carolina. There's different kinds of jungles. There's different kind of trees. There's different kind of ground cover. There's different kind of shapes. So you've got ferns, but there's different kinds of ferns, right? So what I would do is I would draw it out, and then I would have fun going back and playing with the texture and busting that up a little bit when I ink it, just to make it interesting. And again, I learned from looking at people like Williamson, Frazetta, Wrightson. You know, all those guys lead back to Hal Foster. He was the first guy who really started drawing when he did his adaptation of Tarzan. You can find that online. He's the guy who started doing the first realistic comic narrative. Again, it was sort of like Prince Valiant, is that it wasn't panel to panel in the way we think of comics, but he was telling a comic story in a sequence of panels. And so that way of using the drop shadows, if I had to take out all the rendering and I just go with the blacks, it would still hold. And so that's the overall rule. It has to work if there's no rendering. If you just had white and black, no texture, will it still read? You know, texture's like gravy, right? I mean, when we were looking at those Roy Crane, there was no texture. So again, I did the same thing, another shot of the Phantom and the Devil in the jungle. So I drew that out just like I drew that, like I did this one. I drew it out. And then I had fun painting the leaves, the cast shadow of the leaves over them.
That's great.
That's fantastic, man.
And so what I would do here is I would think, I want these shapes to frame. So I would maybe rough in very roughly, like a shape like that. Oh, these all start with like very rough shapes. Like I want, then the next thing is you take the big shapes and you start to design those shapes. Start to go and design. So again, it's like a separate stage, a design stage. And, you know, I've got folders of jungle stuff and things like that. I'll look at jungle stuff. But anything like this little vine, anything like this is a way of the little texture on these rocks, these kinds of ferns compared to those kinds of ferns. It's not all the same leaf shape. Again, no broccoli tree. No broccoli trees are allowed.
The broccoli trees were harmed.
Mike,
Right.
that was fantastic.
You know. So here's one.
Oh wait,
What?
yeah, you got more, Mike?
Yeah. You got a question?
No, but we're coming up on the pencils down hour.
Okay. Well, here I'll go through. So here's this one, and then I had fun on this one because then I could put the white zip on it to really add that Ben-Day feel. Another shot of the jungle. So I might look at a real pictures of trees, but then what I do again is I think of these shapes, and then I go in, and the first thing I do is I nick in all those shadows, but I make sure I pick a specific direction. So to me, jungles are great fun because basically no rule. You just try to make it look cool. You know, ferns on the ground. It gives me a lot of opportunity to play with shape and texture.
It's gorgeous.
And then I was going to show one more.
Nicely done.
Here's a great. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Can you see that? Okay. So this is Nestor Redondo, one of the great Filipino artists, who I really learned a lot about adding all these textures. And again, you see a lot of similarities between what he's doing. Come on. And Frazetta.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think what he does is he goes through and he does the outline, and then so all this is just beautiful. There's no ugly or lazy shape. Everything is beautifully designed. There's not a line going where a line shouldn't be. If you want to see some great comics, we didn't even get a chance to go into it because, again, we could go on. Look at Joe Kubert. Joe Kubert laid out Rima that was then finished by Nestor Redondo. And that's a great example of what I'm talking about because Kubert is a great designer, one of the best designers. To me, it's like, actually, he's the best page layout designer in comics for me. And then you get a guy like Redondo, who's great at drawing and great at rendering, and then you marry the strength of these two artists. Those are beautiful comics to look at and learn.
I love it.
That's great.
Michael Manley, I relieve you of your duties. Thank you so much. You know what I love, and this is we're gonna wrap. But I want to say I've enjoyed the last 3 weeks of what we've been doing. It started off knowing we couldn't fit all of this into one episode. Then it just kept going. We've barely scratched the surface. But the coolest part about what we've been doing and where we are right now is that you guys are receptive to it. When Mike and I did this stuff a couple of years ago, it was kind of like, it was really wavy back then. It was real wiggly. But I love that the people that are watching right now are loving this. Our numbers are up. The tension is hot. The chat is really into it. So I think we just got to keep doing more of these.
My advice for people would be to two things. Collect stuff in a folder very specifically for backgrounds that you like. Study people like Frazetta and the more illustrative cartoonists from the 70s back. Go back and look at people like Hal Foster. Look at people like Roy Crane. Look at a lot of the Disney stuff, because there's a lot of great books out on animation now. There's a great book out on Maurice Noble. And then get a sketchbook and go outside, especially now, and draw some trees. Just draw to study the shape. You know, you don't have to go out. But Andrew Wyeth said that he loved this time of year because you got to see the bones of the earth. You get to see the structure of a tree. So I think a good assignment is to go out and draw a couple trees, then come home and practice doing some designs, more push designs of those trees, of those bushes, as an exercise. And what you will find is you will start building your strength, and you will start building your knowledge and your observation and your storage so that you will be able to recall it. Because again, one of the things I have to always deal with when I'm drawing a phantom is I never have enough time. Never have enough time. I have to be very effective at what I do. So, and I don't want it to look boring, and I don't want it to look like broccoli trees, right? I hate broccoli trees. You know, if I did a broccoli tree, I want it to be a really great, cool broccoli tree, not a lame bubble leaf. No bubble leaves. You know.
All right, Mike. That's it for tonight. Thank you so much.
And speaking of never enough time.
Yeah. So I wanted to just kind of set this up on our way out the door because we've reached the end of November. I don't know how this happened. Again, thank you so much to Mike for lecturing for us, and I'm glad that so many people have taken things away from it. This is the ending of our programming for November. Next week is Thanksgiving. We're taking Wednesday off next week. We'll be back. Sorry, but we will be back.
It'll be gravy. How to draw gravy.
We'll be back in December with new programming. This is the time where you need to start hitting that like button, you guys, so we can keep doing these things.
Share this.
Yes, share this, share like, and again, go back and watch the archives. We have hundreds of episodes, and there's lots of great art tutorials as well. So I'm going to say goodnight for us to Mike and Steve, my wonderful co-hosts. Thank you guys so much. Enjoy the beginning of your holiday season, and don't forget to wash those Kirby hands.
Or your Yukon Cornelius hands.
All right, guys. Thanks. See you on the other side.